Hi everybody, Rad Mom here. Welcome back to the garden, my happy place to talk about scary things. In today's video, we're going to be tackling patriarchy. Is it truly nature's way? Is it really just the natural order of things? Is it inevitable? Obviously, I'm going to say no. But to help back me up on that, I have Milo the Mini Minute Man.
What if I carried you around like this all the time, like a small little man? I should probably actually make an introduction here. This is Manzanita, or Neats. She's my new child. I gave birth to her.
Because after Monday's visit to Brotown, I needed a break and I wanted to spend today with somebody that I like. Okay, Milo is an archaeologist and he is my go-to source for like the hottest, newest thing in archaeology because he's like 20 and he's adorable.
Yeah. You little shit. Wow, this is glitching out horribly. What did you do, Neats?
You know, he also comes flinging hot facts. And today he's going to be spitting at us about something called the Green Sahara, which is a period of time that used to be fanciful and apparently has been proven to be true. That takes place in that dark era of human history where there is no history, back before written records are available. And that's where archaeology comes in.
From the outside, the Cave of Swimmers is wholly unremarkable. It consists of 4 caves that are carved into a large sandstone wall, and it's located at the very southwestern part of the modern country of Egypt. It is part of a greater complex called the Wadi Sura, or the Valley of Pictures, which is on the southern end of a large plateau. The greater plateau is called the Gilf Keber, and is a 3,000 square mile sandstone plateau stretching from Libya into Egypt. The Cave of Swimmers, which was discovered in the Wadi Sura, or the Valley of Pictures, had some pretty spectacular artwork in it. It has a lot of paintings of animals and handprints, all of which are done in red ochre. But not only are there handprints and animal drawings, there are depictions of humans. Some of them wearing elaborate robes, some of them appearing to be dancing, but some appear to be swimming. In 1935, when Almasy wrote his book, The Unknown Sahara, he mentioned the Cave of Swimmers. And in his book, he postulates a very interesting theory, that the paintings of the Cave of Swimmers are real-life depictions, illustrating something that had actually happened right there.
I feel like that is the simplest deduction you could possibly make from looking at a bunch of cave paintings, that those people were painting pictures of things they had seen. Yeah.
The implication of this theory was that there was a time when there was water in the Sahara, and people were like, hell no, absolutely not.
And this is the level of deduction I feel like I'm going to be making here. If you're willing to come along with me on my little conjecture journey here, I'm just going to try and connect up some dots and recontextualize early human civilization in light of this newly available archaeological information, because I think it puts all of that ancient civilization stuff into a fascinating new light.
These bones are relics of a time when the Sahara was not a vast, hot, sandy desert, but rather a lush and fertile grassland.
That's right. And then they found all that stuff.
A time that today we refer to as the African Humid Period, or colloquially, the Green Sahara. I really want to use this video as an opportunity to try and paint a picture for what the Sahara would have looked like during the African Humid Period.
And I really want to take some of the information that Milo has presented here and add to it with some of my own conjecture. And that's all this is. I am not an expert, even as much as Milo is. I am not an archaeologist. I'm just sitting here looking at this broader picture and seeing a couple of interesting things, I think.
There was people like you, people like me, people like anyone who is watching this video. But today, all that's left not only of their culture, but of their world is a vast expanse of sand.
Except that, of course, those people's understanding of astronomy was limited by their perspective physically stuck to the ground. We have a much better understanding of the mechanics of astronomy these days, I guess. And this is wild stuff. This is epoch-level stuff.
The perihelion is the closest that the Earth gets to the Sun. So as the Earth orbits the Sun in its 1-year rotation, there is somewhere along that turn where the Earth is the closest point to the Sun than it is at any other given point. Today, our perihelion occurs in early January, meaning that during the northern hemisphere winter, when the Earth is tilted that way a little bit, it hits the closest point to the sun. But because of the Earth's wobble, there will be times where the Earth is not pointing this direction and pointing this direction instead. During the Green Sahara period, the perihelion would have occurred in northern hemisphere summer, meaning that an entirely different part of the planet would have been facing the sun during the perihelion.
So how freaking cool is that? I'm just nerding out right now, and I think all this is so interesting.
Now, at our closest point, the Earth passes 91 million miles from the sun, which is really, 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 really far. But this is about 3 million miles closer to the sun than we are at our farthest point, which is really, 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 really far. And that tiny difference of about 3 million miles is enough to make a pretty big difference on the planet depending on which way it's pointing. This tilt means that during the African humid period, the Sahara Desert, or what's now the Sahara Desert, got a 7% increase in solar radiation. Counterintuitively, that extra heat is actually the thing that kicked off the African humid period. Land has a high albedo, which means that the surface of the land heats up a lot more than water does. So while North Africa got absolutely blasted by thermal radiation, it got really, really hot, but the Atlantic Ocean right next door remained very cold. This meant that during the summers, the hot air of the African continent would rise up. This would create a low pressure zone, which would allow for all of that cold, moist air from the Atlantic Ocean to rush in to fill its place, which would result in exactly what you would expect: monsoons.
And the idea that there used to be a lot of rain in northern Africa is a controversial thing that I heard about way, way back in the 1990s. When that guy Robert Schoch was going around showing people pictures of the sides of the Sphinx and asking them if it looked like water erosion or wind erosion. So maybe the Sphinx is carved into a rock that was sacred to people 10,000 years ago. That's actually possible. This is a theory I've been aware of for a long, long time. I've never understood why it was seen as so completely preposterous. And like all those establishment people have egg on their faces now, which kind of ties back to the thing I was saying in the video on Monday about appeals to authority. Like, authorities can be wrong, y'all.
Oh, gotcha. Meow is right. Little man.
That is a girl cat. That's a girl cat, Milo. What are you doing?
During the African humid period, much of North Africa would have been inundated in massive seasonal monsoons, called, rather unoriginally, the West African monsoon. So since this monsoon rain is linked to the direction that the planet is facing, and the direction the planet is facing is on a 21,000 year cycle, this means that the Sahara Desert will turn into a lush green grassland about once every 21,000 years. So what we today call the African humid period, or Green Sahara, is actually just the most recent instance of something that has been happening every 21,000 years for the last 800,000 years. That is a lot of green Saharas.
And that is terrifically humbling, isn't it? To know that there were entire civilizations that sprang up and disappeared in this region of the world that's now completely a desert. And so for all of recorded history, we had no idea that this stuff even existed. And then when people started looking at it more closely, at first there was such skepticism that they were like literally laughed out of rooms.
The people who created the paintings at the Cave of Swimmers would have lived lives dictated by these seasons of massive rainstorms. And they are far from the only ones, because the Wadi Sura, or Valley of Pictures, where the Cave of Swimmers is located, is home to a lot more rock art. Take, for example, the rock art at Margaret El Kantara. These beautiful images depict shepherds with livestock.
So they may have been dabbling in animal husbandry way, way, way back, but I want to point out that these were hunter-gatherer societies for the most part, and that's really key here.
And the Wadi Hamra rock art shows images of animals like giraffes. But one of the most famous of these caves is the Cave of Beasts. You got it? Look, hey buddy, come here. Yeah, is that warm? You're so damn cute. I don't want to take you off my laptop, but I have a job to do. You know what? No, we can work around this, Neats.
That's not a good idea, Milo.
The Cave of Beasts contains nearly 5,000 different pieces of rock art, and they are absolutely beautiful. They show things like the classic handprints, as well as many human figures, some of them dancing and partaking in ritual, others wearing elaborate outfits. But the cave truly gets its name from the countless depictions of wild animals present all across its walls. Oh, thank you. Now you just turned my computer off. Okay, Neats. I'm sorry. You're being evicted.
Don't Told you so.
Mega Lake Chad would have reached its zenith about 11,500 years ago, and evidence of the lacustrine or lake sediments that are left over from its existence show that it would have been a rich ecosystem. There are evidence of mussels, seagrass, fish, and birds that would have once called this place home. And for a lake that's larger than the Caspian Sea and existed for almost 10,000 years, it's amazing to try and think about what sorts of ecosystems would have existed there that we just can't even see anymore today. Geologic evidence shows that the lake went through a few fluctuations throughout its time, sometimes experiencing a few hundred years with lesser rainfall, and other times experiencing more.
So this is all very interesting, but what the hell does any of this have to do with the development of patriarchy? Well, wouldn't you know it, drastic climate change has a way of affecting human culture.
But like every other body of water in the Green Sahara, eventually something changed. About 5,000 years ago, the lake level fell dramatically. And in the course of just around 1,000 years, one of the largest lakes on the planet disappeared.
I also found some supporting evidence somewhere else, talking about the collection of dust particles and sediment, and their interpretation of this evidence that this may have happened as quickly as within 100 years.
And just like the Kiffian people, the Tenarians left behind huge middens. A midden is the fancy archaeology word for a giant pile of garbage. It actually provides some of the best information that you can get in an archaeological site. Both the Kiffian and Tenarian middens tell us a lot about their diet. In these piles of refuse, archaeologists have found the remains of a myriad of creatures. Animals like catfish, turtles, elephants, warthogs, wildebeests, and what was the other one? Elephants? Did I already say elephants? Elephants, as well as, towards the end of the occupation of the site, domesticated animals like cattle. This history of the animals in the Green Sahara is something which is corroborated by archaeological sites and rock carvings all across the desert. And they help us paint a wonderful picture of what the world would have looked like when these people lived there.
And the gradual, inevitable degradation of their environment, and some of their response to it.
Take, for example, at the Messac Plateau in Libya, where there is this beautiful carving of two alligators. It's believed that this carving depicts a mother and its baby, or the much more famous Dabos giraffe. This carving is in the Air Mountains of Niger, the very same mountains which provided the lithics and amazonite to those that were once living at Gobero.
So that's right, we're talking intricate trade networks, the whole bit.
Archaeologists and paleoecologists speculate that this shows a male and slightly smaller female, and the carvings are absolutely massive, measuring 20 feet or 6 meters in length. In fact, they are the largest animal petroglyphs currently known. But as the climate started to change and drive people out of the Green Sahara, the way that people lived also had to change, and the carvings of the African humid period actually outline this very well. As people began to rely less and less on wild game, they had to find new ways to feed themselves, which led many groups of people to begin to rely on animal husbandry. This is known as the African pastoral period.
And this is where we start to meet up with recorded history. A combination of dwindling resources and a high population is going to just naturally create conflict. And out of this conflict arose the strong men, the kings of old, promising prosperity through submission, enshrining this in law and religion, and even perhaps wiping away any trace of what had been before that they could find, as these things tend to go. But then, once things inevitably improve after a while, the strong men are left without their justification for their own existence. So then they just have to keep fighting amongst themselves, which sounds like, what we have to this day. That's the civilization that we now live in.
Take, for example, this carving, known as the Crying Cows in Algeria. It's a beautiful carving, and it's dated to around the start of the African humid period about 7,000 years ago.
I assume he means the African agrarian period or whatever, the one right after that.
Legend says that a herder is the one that carved the crying cows, and that he was grieving the loss of his herd after a particularly harsh drought. It is not remotely impossible that an oral history has been handed down year after year after year for thousands of years throughout this region, telling the story of the crying cows.
And obviously this story of a loss of this lush green land full of game almost sounds like the Garden of Eden. This might be the origin of all sorts of widespread cultural memory.
Granted, we will probably never know the ground truth of these carvings, but given what we know about the African humid period and how long oral memories can be passed down, it sounds like it actually could have a shred of truth in it. The former hunters and gatherers of the African humid period began to rely more and more on agriculture and animal husbandry.
You have to then guard those resources. You have to stay in one place. and guard those resources from people who might want to steal them from you.
But no matter how much they began to refine those techniques, they were running from something that was unescapable. Humanity's true great equalizer from the beginning of time to this day. The climate. About 4,000 years ago, the last acacia tree at Gobero withered, dropped its leaves, and died.
Which is very interesting because that coincides so beautifully with the origin of what we consider to be civilization. 4,000 years ago, aka about 2000 BC, which is the origin period of both ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt.
The Earth's wobble was rapidly returning to center once again. Year after year after year, the monsoons got a little bit smaller, their rains reached a little bit farther, and by about 3,000 years ago, they had ended altogether.
And this is when the ancient Babylonians had risen to power in Arabia, and were putting things into writing for the first time with cuneiform, and the Code of Hammurabi is, of course, their famous law doctrine that they have bequeathed to posterity, which includes, among other things, the first official clamping down on the agency of women.
So when you think about the size of these rivers and these lakes and the bodies of water that would have existed out here for thousands of years, there is a lot of potential that there is going to be some pretty impressive archaeological discoveries to be found at them.
And I really can't wait to see what they tell us about the way ancient people lived. Because everything that I've ever read about hunter-gatherer societies indicates that they are pretty egalitarian. We have this tendency to treat patriarchy and the subjugation of women as just the natural order of things. And they're not. They're not. Not only are they not the natural order of things, they're actually a pretty recent innovation.
Now, I also want to temper our enthusiasm for just a moment here, because the African humid period, or the Green Sahara, is something which has been used a lot by some of the alternative history people. They use it to support everything from that lost advanced globe-spanning Ice Age civilization, all the way up to Atlantis being lost in the sands of the Sahara Desert. Now, I'm obviously not taking it that far.
And neither am I. I think that this really does recontextualize what had been characterized as the flowering of civilization, and it starts to look like a reaction to the dramatic shifts in the climate. This strongman culture eventually developed into the colonialism that we are all familiar with, from ancient Mesopotamia through Greece to Egypt and Rome, and then on into modern Europe and the church and all that stuff. Like, there's a basically straight line. And one of the common threads in that line is the subjugation of women that seems to have coincided with the large-scale advent of agriculture, which was driven by these climactic shifts that destroyed the environment in which ancient people had been living. And it's fascinating to me how the seat of power of these ideas seems to have shifted, but these ideas themselves are remarkably consistent, because they have to be, because it's one of those cult tactics, the control of information. And one of the best ways you can keep people from taking in any kind of information is by convincing them that it's not important or true. I just really have to wonder, why in hell archaeology would have been so reluctant to embrace this idea, because there's been evidence of it going all the way back to the 1850s, I think, was the guy who discovered that Cave of the Swimmers.
Evidence for the Green Sahara dates back much farther than our modern archaeological investigations and the discoveries in 2000. In 1855, renowned German explorer Heinrich Both had just returned from an arduous 5-year expedition through the Sahara Desert. When he returned from his travels, he depicted some rather unusual sightings. He had come across cave paintings and carvings depicting humans, but also gazelle and giraffe and hippos, carvings which he reported were surrounded by hundreds of miles of empty sand in every direction.
The logical deduction that those people were just drawing pictures of stuff they saw is so simple and straightforward. That's the kind of thing that I think I'm doing here. Milo didn't go into this because I don't think that's his axe to grind. And of course, this is my own bias showing here, but this is what I see when I look at this. I see a possible explanation for all this shit. I see a possible moment for the origins of this artificial order upon which all this shit is built. I believe this amounts to strong evidence that not only is the subjugation of women artificial, but it is a fairly recent innovation. This provides a motivation for it beyond just the greed of some men, which personally I find pretty satisfying. And I hope you guys thought that was interesting. I can't just do the BS response videos to the bros. I could do that forever, but oh my god, my brain would melt. Every once in a while, I have to do something a little more out in left field because I just find some of this stuff so interesting and I love connecting dots. So thank you so much for coming along with me on my little conjectural journey this evening. I hope you enjoyed our visit with Milo, the Mini Minute Man. I have been Rad Mom, and if you made it this far, please do subscribe to the channel so that we can all work together to bring feminism back into the real world, because as you can see, I think it belongs here. I think the idea that women are people is a pretty strong hypothesis. Come back at the top of the hour for the live stream and discussion where we can connect the dots a little more, and I will see you guys Friday with a brand new video. See you there. Bye.